people thinking, okay, all is forgiven because you've won the game and the team's played well, and you can sort of ride that for a while. We see that it's not as easy as it used to be these days. The game's really professional, I know that. But in athletics, you're out there. It's an individual sport, and if you underperform, if you're not in top shape, if anything, the diet, nutrition, your mind, something's just slightly variably out of sync, then it's going to show. And it's tough. It really is, because obviously a lot of times in the athletics world, some of your best friends actually are the people you're competing against. So it's all great when you're not competing, but when you are competing, it's all about winning, and you got that winning mentality. So we've got our guest today, and I think it's really kind of her to come on board, because we want to inspire people in the area. The area means a lot to us, Salford, the surrounding areas. It really means a lot to get young people out there playing sports, and people of any age, really. It's not to say you can't start athletics or any sport at any age. Anyone can start at any age. We've seen that before. You can compete, you can volunteer, and so on and so forth. So I'll introduce our guest, Abigail Irozuru. Thank you for joining us this evening. It's very kind of you to come on board.
Thank you for having me here.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. So tell us a bit of an insight into your career for our listeners, Abigail. How did your sort of career pan out for you, and sort of the highs and lows, what you got involved in the sport, and just a bit of an insight for our listeners to sort of get an idea, how you sort of began, and some of the highs and lows, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you mention being able to inspire young people and people at any age to get into sport. I actually started at what people would maybe consider quite a late stage, athletics. I started when I was 15 years old, and it was the following year that I first represented England, and the following year after that I represented Great Britain. So it might have seemed as though it was a really accelerated, quick rise, but actually I had always participated in different types of sports, whether it was like gymnastics, whether it was even like informal things like playing outside and climbing trees and kicking football with my cousins and my family and my brothers and sisters. So, that's how I got into the sport, and I just kept going because I really loved the idea of meeting new people, of connecting, and travelling as well. It was great to be able to travel around the UK and then eventually travel around Europe for competitions, and now I compete across the world. So I'm so passionate about travelling, about meeting new people, and obviously the final thing, winning medals. That's always an incredible thing to do.
That's really interesting stuff. And you mentioned there, as a child, you used to get out there and play. And do you think, is it a cliche, or is there some truth in it that these days young people don't seem to do? I don't know. I mean, I do see young people do play, but in saying that, I have to agree, I don't think it is only a cliche. I think that the generation now, because of modern technology being influential, they don't sort of get out there and play. And I think, like you says, it's like you can develop from a development program, and that's great, but equally just getting out there and having fun is a big thing. Do you think that young people possibly these days don't sort of have that sort of, get out there and have a sprinting tournament at the local park and just kick a ball about? And
I know, and actually I do agree, and I'm sure it's not just in our imagination. It must be true, because a lot of people, they love to sit in front of the television and watch TV or play games, and it's really understandable that things have progressed so much in technology that, children have an iPhone or something in their hand from like the age of 2 or 3. They know how to use these things, whereas for me, and maybe for you as well, when you were growing up, I didn't have a phone until I was like 11 years old or something. So my form of play was jumping on a skateboard, or when the snow came out, my stepdad would take us to a really high hill with a black bin bag, and we'd roll down. You don't need fancy equipment. It's just fun to be outside, and I think that's why I love athletics as well, because it's not a super high cost sport. It's literally, if you can run, if you can jump, if you can throw, it's accessible to everybody. So yeah, absolutely,
I think so too. That's the beauty, isn't it, where it's just fantastic. And I certainly, when you go to a track, you just get that sort of giddy feeling. It's just a beautiful place to be. I think just the atmosphere, the people, the camaraderie, just everything that goes with it. And yourself, there's been a few obviously you've had a number of highs in your career and you've had a few lows as well, and that takes a lot of mental strength that I believe you can transfer into life. I was going to say real life. Athletics is real life. But real life in the sense that just general life. And life is tough. Life's not easy out there. I mean, life has suffering. It's hardships, and we go through stuff, and we have, people have problems, health, and they have problems with job losses. And all these things happen to people in life that you're not always prepared for. In sort of academia, you're prepared for like academic pathways, but you're not prepared for what's to come. It's probably not their job to do so, you could say. But do you think that your adversity in track and field made you a stronger person?
It certainly has. I think adversity would make anybody a lot stronger if you learn the lessons that you need to going forwards from it, if you don't allow the adversity to crush you. And so I feel like one of my biggest high and low years would be 2012, which was, of course, the London Olympic year. For any sports person at any level, it's going to be an incredible achievement to be there. It's kind of like the pinnacle of an athlete's career. And for me, I'd jumped the Olympic standard that year. I'd jumped out my skin. I'd worked so hard. I was ranked amongst the top 10 long jumpers in the world, and yet I didn't get selected for that team. And so that was absolutely heartbreaking. It was like this big high of jumping an Olympic standard, being so having achieved so much, and yet not being able to represent my country on the biggest show on earth. So that was an incredible adversity. And I think from that I've had other challenges that I've had to face, but being able to look at that, reflect on like how I can do better going forwards from there, has really helped me in all walks of life.
That's really interesting you say, and I think for me it's like there'll be listeners listening in wondering, well, how do you jump the sort of qualifying, and they'll be wondering even in terms of, say, sprinting, you can run a qualifying time or whatever it is, and they're probably wondering, how do you sort of jump a qualifying margin or run a qualifying time, you don't qualify for the team. And I'm not sort of being contentious, by the way. I'm just, some of the listeners are probably wondering, have you any thoughts on that you can sort of share with the listeners in terms of their understanding of how things work in terms of Olympic trials? Or
yeah. So in 2012, it was very much, it depends on who the head coach is, and it depends on the mentality of British sports in general. And at that time, they just wanted to take the best team that they had out there, because I'd only jumped that distance once. And because at the UK Champs I'd finished fourth rather than coming in the top 3 or the top 2, they just didn't believe that I would be able to repeat the performance. They took it off that I shouldn't go, and so they took only one long jumper rather than taking the 2 or the 3 that they could have taken. So I definitely see it from their point of view, but also at the same time I feel like it was a home games. You want to give people in the UK a chance to see actual British athletes in the stadium, and so it was a very frustrating thing. I know that going forwards, to be on a team, you just have to make sure you're at the top. You have to make sure you're number 1 or number 2, so that you take the decision out of the selectors' hands. Even if you have jumped the standard, they can't question any further. Yeah. No,
absolutely. I think that's all any of us can do. And sometimes, these things happen, and even many athletes, past and present, there's been situations where they haven't performed to maybe the best of their ability and haven't qualified. But equally in saying that, we do sometimes see people sort of sneak through the back door and go on and just do wonders, really. What would you say in terms of so you get this sort of performance where what length did you jump on the sort of your PB? What was the...
So the Olympic standard at the time was 6 metres and 75 centimetres. That was the A standard. And I jumped 680, which was 5 centimetres beyond that. So, yeah.
Well, that's incredible. And I think people like at home listening in, think 6 metres. Just think your living room and sort of imagine 6 metres, just how far it is. And most people's living rooms probably would struggle to be 6 metres, in the sense that, the length anyway, it's going to be there and thereabouts. And I think it's difficult for people to sort of see and realise just how much distance you get. And also bearing in mind too, by the way, that the jump needs to be done without any faults as well. So there is which we won't go into at the time that we have, but the point being is that there's also a chance that you get disqualified for jumping too. So it's not a question of just holding yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it is tough, and it really is. But what would you say? What happened when you got that sort of 680? Where were you then mentally, physically? There must have been something special that just clicked. I'm always intrigued how people can just pull something out of the bag like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, it's definitely something that I do look back on. Thankfully, somebody actually in the crowd had recorded it, so I get to go back on YouTube and reflect on that and just see the joy and the celebration. And it was actually, I do like to pull things out of the bag in the last round. I did it last weekend when I competed in Vienna, and I did it when I jumped my 6 meters 80 personal best. I was having a really, really great competition anyway, and at the end of the competition, I was aiming to get into the European champs rather than the Olympics. I was aiming to go Europeans and then to the Olympics. And so the European distance was a lot shorter. And in the round before, or 2 rounds before, I jumped 3 centimetres off that standard, which was 6:55. And so I was just like, all I need to do is just run. It doesn't matter. Don't think about fouling. And in my head, I was just like, just let go and let God do, because I've worked so hard. So I'm just going to do what I can do, and God will do the rest. And I think it was just that letting go and not forcing anything, just getting into a flow state, which I'm sure you obviously understand about. And we can't always get into there of our own accord. We just need to just stop overthinking. And I think that's what sports people do. When you see them playing in the zone, when we do our top performances, it is because we've just stopped thinking and we've just let our body do what it knows it can do, because we've practiced it a gazillion times.
Absolutely. I think so. I think that, you do all you can. That's all anyone can do. And then just go to process and focus on the process, and you got the outcome you got in your mind. Do you have in your mind a distance that you want to jump? Do you sort of etch that into your mind and think, okay, 655, 680, 670? Do you sort of edge that into your mind and then just go to process, or do you sort of just go to process and just jump? And
so it's a combination of the two. I think it's important to have the processes. My coach loved to call it KPIs, key performance indicators. So there's 1 or 2 things that I'll have in my mind that I've been working on that I need to make sure that I'm hitting whilst I'm on the runway. But then also I do visualize and do rehearse coming out of the pit and seeing, a distance that I'm maybe going for. So maybe it's next weekend, I'm going to the UK champs, and the distance would be a personal best, an indoor personal best, so I would want to see a 670 or a 680 there. And so I go through that visualization process, but I also hit the process goals as well, because I know that they're key.
Definitely. And did it take you a while to get over to this point? And I'm not not going to London. Did it take you?
Oh, yes, certainly it did. I think I didn't really get over it properly for 2 years, or even, 2 or so years. And I didn't realise in the time that I was going through that I was still harbouring the frustration and the sadness and of not going. And I realised on reflection, I remember mentioning this to a friend, that after not being selected, when I received the call, you've not been selected to go to the games, I didn't cry, and I hadn't cried properly for about 2 years. I hadn't realised that I hadn't let it go. I just tried to go into a shell and just be really apathetic about the whole thing, because I didn't really want to fully take on the weight and the enormity of what had just happened. Yeah. It did feel like a massive tragedy, and I think I just didn't want to feel that. And then when I did, I was able to kind of just feel a lot freer. And I know that residual of just harbouring all that frustration, there was injuries that just came recurring, and I just wasn't performing at my best. And when I finally let go of that, I came back and I became a British indoor champion in 2015. So it was kind of a few years of just going through hardship, because I hadn't let go of something that I really needed to.
Yeah, no, I think it's almost like a bereavement in one sense. Maybe bereavement's a bit strong, but it's one sense that your heart's on there, and especially being a London Games. It was a great games as well, great games for GB, and they performed really well there too, exceptionally well. And I think that the great thing is it has left a legacy to the point that the will perform well again. I still think myself, Abigail, that things are a lot better at the highest level of the hierarchy. I still think there's a long way to go at junior level, I think, in terms of recruitment and talent ID. That's just my perception and opinion. I think that there's a long way to go, in the sense that, can we get people like yourself who are living it and doing it, going into schools, encouraging youngsters, doing ID programs, because there must be other Abigails out there. There must be people out there that have got exceptional talent that no one will ever know unless they're encouraged. And the trouble is, with all the greatest respect, teachers mean well, they're great, they do a tremendous job. At the end of the day, a young person, I know from my own experience, when you see an athlete come in, it's a different ball game. You listen and you sort of take things on board. And you just have that idea, and the idea becomes an association and then becomes an inspiration. And do you think, from your perspective, and you'll know more than me, is there a lot being done to encourage young people in different areas to get involved and participate and identify talent?
Yeah, I think at the grassroots level, I think England athletics and British athletics are really trying. So, for example, at major meets, they do try to hand out invitations to young kids to go to bigger competitions so that they can see their athletes in person. I go into schools on a regular basis and try to just do talks and take them through quick circuits and things like that. In the past, particularly when I took a step back from athletics, I really was trying to develop gifted and talented programs and to help them to see the gifted and talented young people in sports, just the elite athlete perspective. So I just gave them an insight into our world, into the training facilities that they would have access to, even people that maybe didn't want to become sports professionals but wanted to work in that environment, so whether as physios in sports therapy and different things. So I do think as individual athletes, there's a lot of individual athletes who really want to support their home counties, their home cities, and encourage participation, because it's just so important, not just for obviously healthy mind, healthy body, healthy spirit, healthy everything. It's just such a good way to live life. It's just a lifestyle, I think. Absolutely.
And I think in the past sometimes there's been situations where some of these sort of athletes haven't been utilised in the way they could have been, because Great Britain's had a strong tradition of great athletes over the years, by the way. Great athletes have come through. I just think sometimes that they may have been underutilised, and sort of bring them back in again in coaching roles, in ambassadorial roles, and get them back in schools, because that's the only way you're going to produce any sort of athletes, to get people who've done it before, learn from them, become mentors and all that sort of stuff to go forward. But equally in saying that, no doubt you've got unfinished business yourself, so in one hand inspiring other people, but the best way to inspire, I think, is sort of doing it as well, which you are doing. And what's your aspirations now? Where do you go from here? I mean, you're young, you got time ahead of you, you're back performing again. Where do you sort of hope to go?
It's funny to say you're young when I don't feel so young, and I've only maybe got a few more years in the sport, but I shouldn't even cap that. I should just keep going and have fun and until I keep jumping. I'm just going to keep jumping. But definitely the goal immediately would be the Tokyo 2020 Olympic Games, which is getting closer and closer each month. Wow. Before I might have said, it's 2 years away, but now we're actually in 2019. 2020 will soon be upon us. So I'm just taking everything as it comes. So the European Championships indoors are in Glasgow. I want to go to there. There's the World Champs in Doha at the end of the year in October. And so I'm just going to keep cycling, do an indoor season, do an outdoor season, and really make the most of the opportunities that I have to compete at a high level, because it's a blessing, and I just want to make sure that I utilise the gift.
That's a good way to look at things. And are you enjoying it now? Are you feeling that you sort of found your place, and I guess in one sense there's probably not going to be a day where you think what could have been in London. I think that's natural and normal. We do sometimes, I think everyone in any situation like that, there's going to be times when one can reflect, but that is gone, and you are moving forward and you've done really, really well. Do you think in your own mind that this is it, Tokyo is the one for me, or do you think, well, you know what, actually if that doesn't work out, maybe we'll see what happens beyond that?
I think that I'm believing that this is the one, third time lucky and all that.
Yeah.
So 2012, I didn't go because of really, I believe, selection policies were just really quite flawed. 2016, unfortunately, my body just decided to not play ball.
Yeah.
Suffered an Achilles rupture and had surgery despite being in incredible shape. And so 2020, I feel like my mind is in the right shape, my body is in the right shape, and I've got time to get back to an incredible standard. I will be better than my best in 2020. I just know it, and so I'm very optimistic that I'll be there. I've no doubt.
No, that's fantastic, and so you should be. I think it's sometimes it's one of them. Life, it's the way it is. It doesn't always go the way you want it to go, and best laid plans. Just got to have faith that things don't work out or things do work out. But in the end, we are where we need to be, and I think that you got the talent, got the ability. We say young, certainly young enough to mount a big challenge. But the good thing is, what I sense is that you're really enjoying it. And that's really important too. I think for me, when you sort of see an athlete or a footballer and any sports person, when they're enjoying themselves, be it a golfer, whatever it is, whatever they do, it's that enjoyment, I think, that sort of goes a long way towards them performing at their best, when they're sort of free of any pressure. And do you think that sort of with age and, the sort of the maturity of 2012 to now, that maturation mentally for experiences sort of took you to that place of, I'll just enjoy it now. I've got this, blessed with this talent. And
certainly, and I think as well, I just tried to make the most of it, because in 2012 you've I've got so many years to go, but actually you realise that time is short, things can happen, and so I really do appreciate every single moment. And if I do find myself being a bit moody or being a bit upset or not feeling happy with the session, I do think, what went well and what can I take from this that's positive. If I for example, when I go abroad now to compete, I try to make sure that I actually experience the city or the country that I've gone to, because in the past I would just fly there, fly out, whereas now I'm like, we're going to Berlin, cool, I'll stay an extra day after the competition to walk around the city, which is what I never used to do. And now people look at that, like other athletes that I'll compete with, and they'll just be like, that's a really good idea. I didn't think of that. We don't. We just go to all these places and we don't truly experience it. So now I'm really trying to take advantage of everything. Yeah,
that's a great point. I think, and youth and the young, they say, when we're sort of starting out in any career, we kind of are so focused on the career itself, and we kind of forget it's a big wide world out there. And I sometimes reflect on my own experiences in life and traveling the world, and I think, well, I didn't even bother taking photos of certain situations. Now I'm going through a crisis of throwback Thursdays. I think I'm sort of reflecting on these moments, thinking, where did the time go? But equally insane, at certain moments, I think they're in my mind, but they're not out there. And I think that's really important. I think it's nice to share, and that's one of the beauties, I think, of modern technology, of social media. It's great, I think, that we can share, we can put stuff out there, because it's really nice. And I think that, I don't get a great deal of time to go on there. I tend to be really busy and work long hours, but I do think it's really useful thing. I think it's a wonderful thing that we can do that these days, where you can sort of compete somewhere in the world and put a few photos out there, and it's just nice to sort of reflect on that, because you look back on that and I think, what are we left with in the end anyway? Just sort of memories, and that's the sort of key. But for the young person listening now, they're probably wondering, what a glamorous life. You go to Berlin, you go to Paris, you go to Vienna, all these places. But there is some training to do, by the way. They must like the idea of it. Oh, yes. There's a little bit of training. Even coming here, I've just come from training. I was doing a bit of weightlifting. So often people think, you do jumping, so is that all you do? No. I do sprinting. I do longer runs. I do shorter runs. I'll be lifting weights. I'll be throwing around a medicine ball. I like variety. I'll get a skipping rope in there. There's just so much that you can do. Sometimes if my body isn't feeling up to it, I might be on a bike, but that's not all that often. So training is tough. I'll do maybe 5 to 6 days per week, and some of the sessions I might be at the track for 2, 3, 4 hours, depending on how intense it is, what the recovery is like, and how many sessions I have. So it's not all glitz and glam.
So not just swanning around and walking the cobblestone streets of Paris and sipping some wine in France somewhere. So, and that's the sort of thing too. I think it's about working hard and it's okay to have a bit of downtime as well. I think it's important to have some leisure time as well, equally in proportion to the situation you're in. Sometimes you just got to
it is what it is. You've got to cut yourself off and really focus. And that's the end of that. You know, you can celebrate. And I think that's a frustrating thing with big tournaments sometimes, is that when people are like done, they're competing and you still got to compete.
Yeah.
And they're out there partying, having a good time, but you want to stay focused and you just sort of keep away. And that's sort of, on a really serious note, I think it's really important for young people. How important do you think proximity is to be around the right people? I think it's huge. I think you've got to get around the right people.
So incredibly important. And I would just say that because people think, you know, when they're going through amazing times, I've got amazing people around me, it's great. But for me, it was so important to have good people around me when I was going through the hard times, because those people would encourage me. People say, I'm so smiley. How do you keep smiling when you're on crutches? You know, photos when I'm on crutches, I'm there having a good time. I've got a smile on my face. I'm recovering from surgery. And yet I can still laugh. It's because I've got incredible people around me who can pull me up. Because there's times when obviously I want to be crying my eyes out. There's times when I just want to maybe stop and give up, and I'm frustrated with a session. I'd rather walk away. But when you have amazing people around you who can even just drop you a text, who can just give you a call, who will pop over, it's just so encouraging. And you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with.
I think
and
so.
I love that. I love that phrase. I love that saying, because it's so true. Just right now, I would encourage people to just think, who am I around? And when I'm around them, am I uplifted, or actually do I feel like I'm dragged down? Because it's that you need to be really aware of and like mindful of.
Absolutely, that's a great point. I think that's a really important point too, because you can't do it on your own. I think all of us need help to get there, and it's also reciprocal too.
Certainly.
I think that, you know, it works the other way too. You know, get around people who want the best for you and you the best for them. And unfortunately, we live in a world that sometimes people not just don't want the best for us, they almost want to see us fail. And goodness knows me, people ask me, why do people are like that? I said, well, probably a psychological issue called enabling. They feed off it for some reason. But you can spot them a mile away if you sort of look at them, and they're the ones that they don't sort of clap when you do well. Well, a false clap, or they kind of, you know, go back indoors and do a fist pump in the air when an injury. And that's a sad indictment sometimes of the world we live in. But the point being is that, for sure, sort of get around the right people. Definitely. And who inspired you as a youngster? I mean, you mentioned you started a bit later. Was there anyone specifically that inspired you, any sort of specific athlete that you thought, wow?
Actually, no. I really did just get into it because I just enjoyed the sport. I love meeting new people. But I think what inspired me as I keep going through my journey in athletics are the friends that I have. So the people that I see at the track training hard and who are reaping the rewards of the hard work that they've put in, even when they've suffered challenges and adversities. One of my friends, Montel Douglas, she was, you know, a British record holder in the sprints and suffered a series of injuries. And so she went to the 2008 Beijing Olympics, and the next Olympics that she went to was 10 years later, and that was for a winter sport. I think it was bobsleigh. And for me to see that, it was just so encouraging to see the way that she'd faced the adversity, switched things up. So she got into a different sport because she was so passionate about performing at the highest level. And this is the way that we function. We want to just be at the top of what we do. I don't believe in doing things half-hearted. So I think that was an incredible inspirational story for me as well.
Fantastic. No, that's amazing. And I think what's really interesting about yourself is that from an academic point of view, you sort of study. And one of the issues I used to have in football when I used to work in football full-time, and I do a bit of consultancy work now, I would always harp on the players to do your education, make sure you get your education done. It was a big thing for me. Education's a huge thing for me because I wasn't very academic at school, but beyond school I would become Mr. Academia. And I really think it can really transform your life. As a human being too, you become this better person because you learn, you grow. And I always harp on and say, okay, even if you become this sort of 100 grand a week footballer, you won't regret doing your BTEC. You won't regret doing university if you can sort of fit that in. And it's great to interview some players now who've sort of taken that advice on board, and they've got degrees and honours degrees, and I really think it's so wonderful. Yourself, law, you did law? Was it?
Yeah, I studied law at UCL. Yes.
And it's an irony in athletics for me. I tend to find that people do immerse themselves more in academia. That's not having a shot at footballers. I've got so many great friends in the football environment. I'm just telling it like it is in my experience. I truly believe in my experience that people who
participate in athletics do have more of a tendency to partake in academia. In your own sort of experience, sort of what drove you on to say you're not going to study law as well? Because it's tough going, and
to balance the two. Well, when I first started, so basically, I started quite late, so I wasn't super involved in athletics as much as I would become. As much as I would grow into it. So in 2008, when I actually started university, I wasn't aware of how passionate I was about athletics. So when I went into uni and started studying law, then I realised, actually, this is quite tough to juggle the two. But because I was already in it, and because I'm really passionate as well, like you said about education, I think it's so important to keep going. And I've always been able to kind of balance things really well. So I think it taught me how to manage my time.
Yeah.
And it taught me that to just align my focus in the right areas. And it just meant I had to be strict in certain areas. So maybe I wasn't going to go out and party because I needed to do studying or needed to go to school to have go to bed to have proper recovery for tomorrow's session, for example. So it was just about balancing things.
That's a great point, and I think a lot of businesses could do with that sort of prioritising. A lot of businesses certainly struggle with that. That sort of can filter through into the business world where athletics can learn from business and vice versa. And I certainly think that's one component where you can do a lot. And people sometimes say to me, how do you get so much done in 24 hours a day? It's like, well, you compartmentalise. You kind of, when you've got a job to do, you get the job done. And I tend to sort of break things down into sort of 40, 50-minute segments and list an outcome and think, okay, that's got to get done. And everything's just switched off at that point. There's no phone, no nothing, just get the job done. And there's an old saying, it's like, give something to a busy person and you'll get it done. and that's the issue. I think sometimes it's one of them where, it's easy to become this sort of busy fool and run around chasing our sort of tail everywhere and think, okay, and that's a big thing for me that young people got to learn to in school is how to compartmentalise and, okay, how can I get a lot done? Because people complain, I don't have time, I don't have this. And, I'm not saying some people don't. People have got, it's not easy. But the point being is that if we sort of think diligently, think, okay, it can be done. And I think it's really important. I think, the education is a huge thing to have that, to fall back on, to become a career, to grow as a person. There's many, many aspects to learning, but that's amazing sort of that you managed to do that. That's phenomenal. And sort of as we sort of draw towards the close of the show, it's gone so fast. I guess we could touch on your thoughts on the next Olympics. Do you think Great Britain can do as well as collectively as they have done last? I mean, I admit I was quite surprised as to how well they did last Olympics. Not least that, I have full faith. I have a foot in the camp here too. I love this country. I think it's a great place, a lot of great people too. But the point being, I thought it was going to be tough to maintain that standard. They did really well. I think they finished second, ahead of Russia. And do you think they can sort of maintain that level again, or will it filter out in Tokyo? Or
do you know it's an interesting one? I honestly don't know because I can't speak to what other athletes are doing, but I do believe that we were just still riding the high of the 2012 games, and I think we've had a lot of funding being pumped into it following the games, even as much as you might have thought it would have stopped. We're still passionate about sport, and it's not just in athletics, obviously it's across the board. So I think that's what will keep us going and get us medals.
That's a great point. And one thing I do want to see as well is continued funding at grassroots level. And I think for me, I've maintained for many years, the one thing that has been lacking has been the funding. I think the British people have always gone out of their extra mile as volunteers to support sport across the board.